Hi, I'm Lori from HIS Talk. Welcome and thanks for joining us for today's webinar. It's titled Cerner Takeover of Siemens, Are You Ready? And it's brought to you by HIS Talk. I have just a few housekeeping items to make you aware of before we start the webinar. Attendee phone lines have been muted to prevent background noise. You can use GoToWebinar's questions box in the console to submit questions to our presenters at any time. You may want to familiarize yourselves with that in advance so you'll be ready. The presenters will answer your questions during Q&A at the end. You can also use the questions box or the chat function to send questions or comments to me during the webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded, so you'll receive a link to the recording as well as a link to the PDF version of the PowerPoint presentation in a follow-up email. In the optimism of the announcements about the acquisition, it might be lost that existing customers will have to make some decisions about how they'll go forward. It isn't always obvious what kinds of choices will have to be made or the impact it'll have on your organization when you're acquired. We've brought together two very seasoned industry experts to give you their views on what you can expect. Frank Poggio and Vince Ciotti will give you their unbiased opinions along with a little bit of history. I think you're all in for a really good treat today because the rehearsal was quite interesting. Between the two of them, they have almost 90 years of combined experience in healthcare IT, and they've seen at least 12 mergers and acquisitions from the inside. Frank is the founder and president of the Kelson Group, where he focuses on ONC certifications and market and product strategy. He has a long history of executive roles in healthcare IT companies like Pharmacy Data Systems, Mediware, Citation Computer Systems, Health Microdata Systems, and the University of Wisconsin Hospital. Vince is the co-founder and principal at HIS Professionals, where he consults with client hospitals on system selections, contract negotiations, and IT assessments. Prior to that, he held leadership roles in vendor organizations like Micro Health Systems, HIS, Mikado, and Shared Medical Systems. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Vince.
Thank you very much, Lori. And for the group out there, we have about 10 topics Frank and I are going to cover. Here's the first 5, and here's the second 5. And we're going to alternate back and forth to try to keep you folks awake a little bit. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Frank for the first slide and give him the credit for dreaming this up in the first place. So Frank, your ball.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, I guess the question that's on a lot of people's minds these days is why did Siemens sell and why did Cerner buy? If history is any indicator, essentially we got a company with a very large client base, obviously, Siemens HIS. You got a company that essentially was looking at stagnant growth over the last decade or so, and was looking at essentially making some very significant R&D investments to keep the products, the various products, up to snuff. And as large companies tend to operate, you have the opportunity of alternative investments. So when Siemens purchased SMS years ago for roughly $2 billion, I'm sure somebody at corporate kept looking at what's the ROI, and is there a better place to put our money? And why would Cerner buy Siemens? There was a lot of discussion about this over the last couple of years as to the possibilities, but in a nutshell, you got an organization with a very large client base, so you pick up that client base, and you're in a market that essentially is a replacement market, not a whole lot of new growth in the institutional side of healthcare. And quite simply, the price was right, and we'll get into a little bit about that later. Vince?
Thank you, Frank. And we're going to go over some of the acquisitions Frank and I have seen, a lot of them firsthand in the past. Some of these are ancient, but some are more modern. And there's basically two kinds. On the left here, this is a classic pattern of a non-healthcare firm, or I should say non-HIT firm, buying into healthcare for the first time. Some of these giant names here, you folks should recognize: Lockheed Aircraft, McDonald, and giants like American Express, IBM, on and on it goes. They usually buy in and then they sell out rather rapidly, which is the trend. It's unfortunate, but it happens. And there's another 10, 15 we could add to this list, but you get the point. The other type of acquisitions on the right here are one HIS vendor buying another. Classics, for example, SMS Shared Medical Systems bought Computer Synergy way back in the 80s, renamed it Allegra. Spirit Choice for a while, then Allegra, and then sunsetted around Y2K. Keen has bought a dozen companies. Eclipsys, I won't bore you, you can read them all. These systems generally sunset the competing product and replace them with their own. And of the two, Cerner's obviously the guy on the right, and Siemens is the guy on the left. And I think that kind of sums up what you can learn from history. So, Frank, why don't you pick this up?
All righty. So now you're faced with a decision. Of course, the bad news is your vendor tells you that we've been acquired, which of course forces you to change systems and vendors sooner or later. But of course, that's also the good news, because what's really fascinating is in the healthcare information world, the average life of the system tends to be like 13 to 15 years, as in commercial industry, which is more like 7 or 10. And sometimes some people might argue that you kind of hang on to those systems a little too long. But anyway, hopefully the change will be for the better. Vince?
Okay, Frank, and I'm going to go over the 4 Siemens products, and I kind of color-coded them to help you folks get the message here. The oldest are the ones that are greatest risk. They're just the hardest to maintain and keep the R&D going, and they're colored and coded in red. And then the middle age are in yellow, and the newest will be in green when you see the right side of the slide. But the oldest is purely Invision. Gosh, I started in SMS 1969 with IBM HIS, and that's where that patient accounting system came from. It's hysterical to still see some of the same fields and reports today, 45 years later. We actually had our own ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning, self-developed, wrote our own payroll, HR, for example, materials. They've all been sunset by now. But Invision, being based on COBOL and vSAN, is easily the toughest for Cerner to ever support and will probably be sunset first. Clinicals for Invision, however, are much more modern. They were announced in the 1990 AHA meeting. And the ancillaries really rocked. Novius LIS changed names many times, one of the leading LIS systems out there. They're much newer and will last much longer. Medseries, kind of middle-aged too, came out of Intermountain Healthcare. GTE bought it, sold it to SMS in the mid-90s. So I color-coded it yellow. Soarian, of course, the newest, very modern. Just first started to sell strongly in the early 2000s. So those folks have the longest life cycle. You hear the phrase 10 years bandied about, and I sure believe it. Gosh, it could go 20 or 30 years were it not for the merger. And then lower right, Eagle, may surprise a lot of listeners. There's over 20 of the largest hospitals in America on this very highly customized PL1 IBM mainframe system designed for the demanding New York City environment, Medicaid, Blue Cross and all. SMS bought it from American Healthcare back in 1997, and it's fairly new, although the architecture goes back a long time. And I give it a green color. So I think Soarian and Eagle, the good news, Medseries and Invision Clinicals, medium, and boy, Invision Financials have the biggest risk. Frank?
So an M&A of this kind of nature essentially raises all kinds of support issues, both for the provider who's running the system, just as much as for the vendor who's acquiring the system. First question is, how long can they maintain multiple systems? What might be likely? Actually, interestingly enough, a Cerner executive came out with a statement about a month or two ago in an investor call that said maybe 3 years for the older systems and 5 years for the Soarian system. I'll have a little bit more about that in a second. What drives the whole support issue, a challenge, if you will, is number one, competition and market dynamics. As many of you know, the healthcare world is changing almost day and night in the last couple of years, what with meaningful use and the push for ACOs, and then you have all kinds of new payment arrangements evolving, pay for performance, value-based purchasing, bundle payments, readmission issues, and then every once in a while we have an Ebola-type crisis, which helps pepper the story a little even more. What history shows is that from the vendor perspective, it's an interesting, very delicate balancing act in terms of support and how long, and I'll get a little more into that in a couple of slides. What's important to a provider is whatever promises verbally that the acquiring vendor makes that you get it in writing now. If you don't see it in writing, my suggestion is don't believe it. Vince?
Well, praise Frank. Here's the quote that Frank was referring to. On October 23rd, Cerner had an earnings call with Wall Street investors, and I just copied this right off of the HIS Talk website, which reported it. We put in bold italics the impressive quote to us, the fact that these legacy is the polite phrase, use these older systems, which, again, I think is Invision and possibly Medseries, have a 3 to 5 year horizon, whereas Soarian, we think, a good 10 years, and probably Eagle as well. Now, I have a kind of a fun slide of doing some math. Here's how these vendors, or all the 13 leading HS vendors, rank in terms of 2013 annual revenue. And you can see Cerner was number 2 at $2.9 billion, and Siemens down around 5th, $1.2 billion. And when you add them together on the right, here's the new rank, and it is a different world out there. Cerner is now the king of the heap when you add Siemens billion to their $3.4 billion. And of course, that's 2013. 2014 revenues will go up enormously for everybody here. McKesson will suddenly be in second place for the first time in about 10 years. They've led the pack. And Epic is probably going to do well, as always. And you can read down the list. I put Meditech in green because they were delayed in giving their final revenue, and there's the final number, $597 million. So this is a whole different ballgame now. Cerner is the IBM, as it was in the 60s and 70s. Cerner is now the monster in the 2010s. Frank?
All right, some what I refer to as vendor reality issues. Obviously, any vendor that needs to maintain 3 or 4 or more, as the case will be with the Siemens acquisition, different systems and different platforms and languages and different database, is a very costly and inefficient duplicative process, and that can only be done for so long because changing regulations are one of the biggest cost and investment areas that a software vendor has to deal with on an ongoing basis. As a matter of fact, many people have pointed out that over the last 3 or 4 years with meaningful use, very little real enhancements have been made to vendor software. It's just they've been responding to the regulations as fast as they can and struggling with that. So try to do that for half a dozen or more different packages. And the last issue that's a real reality issue for a vendor in acquisition is coming up with the ROI. So if you're an investor, you want to see return on your investment preferably in 3 years, no more than 5. And if you look at the $1.2 billion that Cerner is paying for Siemens, you can actually make the numbers work in terms of an ROI by reducing overhead, which is duplicative sales, marketing, finance, HR, and so on. Another way to generate that ROI is to increase support fees. A lot of vendors in the past have done this as, quote, an incentive to get the provider to switch over sooner. You look at reducing capital investment, not only just for research and development in terms of maintenance research and development, but facilities, equipment, and so on, wherever you can. And then the last way, and hopefully the more positive way, is getting new sales from the old client base, or what vendors typically refer to as flips. And flips will become the operative word over the next few years, I'm sure, in the Cerner sales and marketing offices. Vince?
Thanks, Frank. I'm going to go over market alternatives for you folks out there based on your size, because if you do go to market, who do you look at? It's an interesting question. So for the high-end systems, which of course is where the money is, Cerner's always been a concentrated in the high-end market, as has Epic and other wise vendors. And you folks on Invision, if you're 500 beds, 1,000 beds, a multi-hospital system, you've got probably 50 to 100 or more people in IT. And the primary vendors, alternative vendors, of course, Epic, they're dominating everything these days. It's almost ridiculous to have a list without them. And Allscripts, the former IDX, much less growth, of course, much less well-to-do, but believe me, very strong in revenue cycle, as you'll see in a subsequent slide. And that's one of the main concerns with Invision revenue cycle clients. Other vendors to consider, not leaders, but GE. I'm sorry, I said Allscripts was the old IDX. My apologies. Allscripts is the old Eclipsys. GE is the old IDX. They're another vendor to consider, but not doing very well and wouldn't be a leading contender. It's out there. And on the right, the functionalities, you can see these guys rock, as you know, and it's mainly through tools. Soarian pioneered the workflow engine. They've got report writers, screen painters, etc. Mid-range, if you're 1 to 300 beds, a standalone community hospital, different world. And here you've probably got 10 to 40 people in your IT department. Your major vendors to consider if you're, say, a Medseries client, 250 beds. Meditech obviously rocks. They've got over 1,000 hospitals. Gosh, I think it's 1,200, 1,300 in the United States on their HIS products, over 2,000 worldwide. And McKesson's Paragon is really an up-and-coming system. It may not have as giant a client base, only about 250, 300 hospitals, but selling like hotcakes. Other vendors to consider in that mid-range marketplace, the old Quadramed Affinity, now owned by N. Harris out of Canada, and NTT Data, which took over Keen's Optimum system. And as I say, in the right-hand column, functionality kind of mixed, not as strong, of course, as the larger vendors. You haven't got as many tools, but extremely functional, especially for that target market. A 1 to 300 bed hospital can't go wrong. And smaller facilities, there are a surprising number of small hospitals on Invision or Medseries. And if you're under 100 beds, you've got a handful of FTEs in IT. We're working as a critical access hospital right now with 1 FTE in their IT department. Who would you look at? Well, the leading vendors, CPSI, Healthplan, MedHost. It used to be HMS, taken over by the wonderful ED vendor called MedHost, wonderful EDIS product, and NextGen, which has picked up the Opus Clinicals and Sphere Financials. And then some other vendors to look at. I won't go through all of them, I'm bored to tears, but a note, Cerner's CommunityWorks is becoming a major player in the small hospital market. It's kind of amazing, but Cerner's modified Millennium kind of fix it, more of a shared build among a group of hospitals, and they sell now to critical access, which is amazing. But on the right, very, very fixed. These screens, what you see is what you're going to get. These reports are very fixed too. So there's your 3 tiers of the market and the 3 alternative vendors, groups of alternative vendors to consider. Frank?
Okay, so in looking at what's out there in the marketplace that you may want to consider as an alternative to a Cerner solution, the first question you want to be asking yourself is, what are our strategic issues? What's important to us as a provider? What are your business priorities? Are you moving into an ACO, building an ACO, going to be part of an ACO? Are you dealing with population health initiatives? Are you seeing the inpatient to outpatient shifts? All these are important, and also, what is your market strategy as a provider in your market? What tools are you going to need to help you either hold or grow your market? Some of the questions you need to answer before you go out and look at all those alternatives. Competition from other providers obviously is important, or maybe you're getting competition from retail. Recent announcement about Walgreens moving into what amounts really to ambulatory care. Do you have any cost of operations challenges, like the readmission issue we talked about earlier, or just any kind of cost initiatives, lean programs, and so on? And then, of course, what are your regulatory vulnerabilities, meaningful use, RACs, readmits, and so on? All those regulations don't apply equally to all providers. You need to focus on the ones that are important to you to help you survive and thrive, and that ought to all be part of your evaluation process. Vince?
Thanks, Frank. I did a very high-level overview here of the various product offerings of the 13 leading vendors. These are the 13 that we trace every year when we track annual revenue for Health Data Management Magazine. And their major products are in the second column. And then I just grouped at the various groups of applications along the lines of what Frank was saying. What are your priorities? So, for example, look way out to the right, physician practices. It's a huge industry today. And with the shift to outpatient, a very growing part of most hospitals' revenue. So who would you look at if you had a very strong physician practice in your organization and you wanted a well-integrated package between your inpatient and outpatient? Well, obviously, in the large green pluses here, Epic has just a superb ambulatory EHR and ambulatory hospital system. The other large greens sign under practice management for Allscripts. They are dominant, possibly the largest practice management vendor. And of course, on the left, these other systems under Allscripts are really the old Eclipsys systems, the Sunrise systems, not as integrated a package entirely on the one cache database. Allscripts is starting to build more and more of these systems together, but under the covers, there's still Eclipsys and the old Allscripts, and not quite as well. It's perfectly integrated, but very functional in the ambulatory practice market. Look down to about the middle there, and NextGen really rocks in physician practices. They're probably the second place behind Allscripts in terms of the number of physicians. Now, once again, interfaced to those systems on the left, the Sphere Financials, the Opus EHR, but as long as the interface is done by them as well as I've seen it done, it looks very good to users. Take another column, for example, ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning, the old general financials for you folks as old as Frank and I. Amazing how the large vendors have just given up on this space. It's all now SAP and Ross and Oracle and gosh knows who. Cerner doesn't offer one themselves. McKesson has built a reasonable one within Paragon. Payables, payroll, ledger, right in the same SQL database running under Windows. But Epic, Allscripts, GE, boom, go find somebody else. Go down the list. Meditech, very functional and very well integrated payables, payroll, ledger. Sphere, nicely done too, CPSI, NetHost. And I just got to be frank, I'm not really sure as you get down the list anymore. I think Quadramed sunset their older ERP, but I could easily be wrong. And I gave up in the lower right-hand corner. It was too much data to research. But what this tells you is depending on your needs, if you have a really large physician practice, if you want to have an integrated financial system, you'd look at certain vendors rather than others. And this could help you in your search if you're looking for a replacement system. Frank?
All right, so that raises the question of when should you start looking? Well, of course, the acquiring vendor is saying, we're going to ride this baby for however long, and our advice in a nutshell is if you don't have it in writing, it gets kind of hard to believe. So the real important question is, what are your operational and strategic issues, and how soon do you want to address them, as opposed to what the vendor would like you to do. You also need to be able to anticipate the real sunset date, because what you're going to see over the next 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it plays out to be, is that sunset date that you're hearing will change almost quarterly. And the reason why is the vendor wants to flip as many customers as they possibly can, but not too many. So if they get a waterfall, they drown. And, of course, if they don't get them fast enough, there's a drought, or at least a financial drought. So there's a delicate balance between the flips and the laggards, and that's what a Cerner company in that situation will be doing. And what that means is you will hear different sunset dates as time progresses. And what you need to do is differentiate the real sunset date from the announced sunset date. And the real sunset date is you're going to be able to get a handle on that by looking at Cerner's performance in the market and what's going on with the industry in terms of regulations and so on over the next year, 2 years, and as time goes on. And, of course, through that entire process, you can expect many special deals. Don't be surprised, of course, when you get the knock on the door and it says, if you sign now, you'll get a free lab system or whatever, half the conversion costs and so on and so forth. So that will happen. But going back to my first point, the timing ought to be your timing for your strategic and operational issues. Vince?
And I'm going to zero in on the contract dates, because I believe they're going to be the most important criteria for when you should start looking. Now, as you saw Zane Burke say, they're going to support these legacy systems for about 3 to 5 years. You folks all have to start a search soon, because, boy, it takes a long time to do a selection, contract negotiation, implementation, proper testing, building, testing, retesting, going live, and hopefully being able to run down the receivables on the old system rather than converting to the new one. So all you folks on Invision, Medseries, and Eagle, I think, have to start looking pretty darn soon. Soarian clients, you've got these contract options way out there. And since they're going to support it, let's define that word briefly. How many bugs will be fixed and when, the major versus the minor ones? How often will releases come out? They used to be annual. Will they now be biannual or triannual? Will Cerner now offer the latest Apple iPhone or iPad or gosh knows Google Glasses, whatever is going to come down the road for Soarian? Or will they just do it for Millennium? Regulatory changes. Most contracts from most vendors have this terrible stipulation, quote, if it's commercially feasible, end quote. Who defines that? Purely the vendor. So you may not see ICD-11 in Soarian, even though you're sure seeing ICD-10. And new features or options, just what are the fees going to be? I doubt if anything will be given away for free. So I would look at your contract date. If your Soarian contract is only 2 to 4 years out, wow, you're in as much of a panic mode as the Invision folks are because it's a short fuse. If you've got a 5 to 7 year duration, you've got a medium amount of time. You can start building a relationship with Cerner, writing your own strategic plan, following some of Frank's outlines. And if you just signed within the past year or two, you're in very good shape. I'm sure Cerner's going to support you for a long, long time because they've been able to get that annual revenue and maintenance and remote hosting fees. Frank?
All right, and part of your assessment essentially is going to be simply what products do you actually use of the Siemens solution. It's not unheard of, obviously, where many providers will buy a complete package and only install 70 or 80% of it. What are your likes and dislikes, both from the user side and the technical side? What is your technical base, the age of it, the capabilities, the reliability? Where do you stand with your refresh situation? And what are your unique workflows that you want to make sure get addressed with any new system? For example, if you're a specialty hospital or you have specialty programs like oncology, psychology, maybe you got a big rehab program, maybe you're involved with long-term care, those are obvious major elements, and you want to make sure, hopefully, that those get included now because they weren't included in the past. Other workflow issues, such as do you use scribes, or maybe you don't use scribes? How about hospitalists? What role do they play? Those are all kinds of the questions that deal with workflow that you should be doing as part of your assessment to make sure that if you move to Cerner or you move to McKesson or whoever it is, that you can address as many of those as you possibly can. Vince?
A few other things I would look at in an IT review or assessment. Your users. If physicians hate the CPOE, think it's too many clicks. If nurses feel a paper chart was better than your EHR, if the vendor's not really answering the phone very much anymore, boy, it's a different world than if you have happy users. Your costs and your staffing are a very important part. As Frank said earlier, if you've got a fiscal crisis on the horizon, which so many community hospitals do or will shortly, how much are you spending today? If you negotiated a good deal for Medseries or a nice low remote fee for Invision, you've got a little more slack. But if you signed a poor deal and you're spending inordinate amounts, more reason to move. Staffing, how many bodies you have. To put in Epic could take a much larger number of people than to put in Meditech or CPSI. And depending on your staffing, how many bodies you have, how many bodies you'll need for the system you want, it could steer you in a certain direction rather than another. And down the bottom, just how diverse your application portfolio is. Some of these specialty areas, lab, pharmacy, radiology are the classic ones, but ED, that's everybody's admitting office today. And an EDIS is often independent from the HIS. Very few vendors have an integrated EDIS. I should say a good integrated EDIS. Specialty vendors are just swarming that market. And OR, OB, cardio, on and on it goes. The number of ancillary systems you've got that you're building interfaces to, and whether you want to integrate them or continue your interfaces, also steers you in a certain direction towards certain vendors and not towards others. And down the bottom, these minor apps like time and attendance, HIM, they're always interfaced, they're always standalones. But some vendors would surprise you. CPSI, for example, has their own integrated time and attendance system. some pleasant surprises out there. Frank?
One of the things you want to make sure you do, which unfortunately doesn't get as much attention as it probably should, is what I refer to as banishing the workarounds. And now I can tell you back many years ago when I was a user of the Invision system and as a consultant working in many provider settings, the number and kind of workarounds in these systems is unbelievable. I did a project several years ago in an organization where there was literally 10 people doing a workaround for something that the system couldn't handle quite right. What you want to do is identify all of those workarounds that you've been living with for however many years and make sure that they're on the top of your priority list as the primary inefficiencies, lost revenues, or payments that you're failing on today that hopefully the replacement vendor can address as much as they possibly can. You need to know what they are and what the vendor you're looking at can do to help you. Make these critical elements of any selection process, but again, you're not going to be able to do that unless you've identified them. The last point I want to make deals with meaningful use. What's really interesting is for meaningful use stage 2 and of course stage 3, you have to be able to generate all that meaningful use data for a full year. So if you do a conversion in the middle of the year, you have to, one, be quite cognizant of how you're going to maintain the trueness of that data so it can stand up to audit. And secondly, what's really been interesting as it relates to the vendor side of meaningful use is virtually all vendors, and Cerner was a leader in this, have gone to modular certification, which means they are not full EHR certified products. So you can't assume that what you're going to replace your Siemens system with is going to be either fully EHR certified or modularly certified in the same way. You have to really be careful with what you're doing on that replacement, or you could find yourself in an MU pickle, if you will, somewhere down the road. Vince?
Interesting point, Frank. So meaningful use goes away. Now, if you do go to market, we've done a lot of system selections, gosh, almost 200 by now. We've learned things to do and not do. Let's start with the don'ts, things not to do. One, a feature checklist, almost a waste of time today. We call it an RFP, request for prevarication. With these tools I mentioned earlier, like screen painters and workflow engines and all that stuff, it's hard to say no to a question on a written checklist. The vendors get a red stamp yes and just go down the form. Instead, on the right here, look at the user manuals. Ask them for access to their user document. It's all online today, PDF files or internet files. Look up your own features you want. As Frank mentioned, your 15 to 25 workarounds. Try to find them exactly as they're documented in the vendor's user manuals. That's the truth, not what a marketeer tries to tell you to make his or her commission, but rather what the technical writers document and what they're legally responsible for. On the left, people put out a 100-page feature checklist and a 1-paragraph request for a quote. Please give us your high-level quote. On the right, we'd rather replace with a 10 to 12-page spreadsheet as detailed on costs as some people spend their time within a feature checklist. Not only the one-time, but the many ongoing things. And those miscellaneous categories, minor things like out-of-pocket, which could easily be 7 figures in a large multi-hospital implementation. Interfaces, file conversions, so many surprising costs that crop up. And to do the TCO calculation, total cost of ownership over 5, 7, 10 years, adding the capital and the operating with all this miscellaneous stuff, and the annual CPI increase. It's incredibly how much more your true TCO is than the quote you may get verbally from a sales rep. Lower left, forget the demos. I mean, the demo dudes and dollies can make an old DOS PC look pretty good as opposed to a new Apple iPad. On the right, how about the implementers, the people you're going to get stuck with for the next 3, 4 years? Meet them. If the vendor won't fly out your project manager and maybe your nurse informaticist and your financial analyst, why not? They're too busy for one day? If that's their attitude, they're not your partner. You don't want to see the VP of implementations. You want to meet your project manager, Fred, Mary, Louise. Are they old enough to get your confidence? Again, Frank and I are kind of ancient. But boy, I had an historical story from a CIO recently. Got a call from the airport kicking off an implementation. It was his install team. They needed a ride. He said, rent a car, and they answered, we're not old enough. Hertz requires you to be 25 before you can rent a car. That's scary. I can tell you, I almost bankrupted my first hospital at the age of 24. You don't want me in your hospital. You want a veteran. And that's a much better question to ask than a feature checklist. Frank?
Some of the other elements, integration issues that you want to pay attention to. What third-party systems do you want to keep that you do have now? Will you have that opportunity? What might be some of the alternatives? And how will you integrate those third-party systems that you want to keep with your Cerner replacement or McKesson replacement, whatever? You may also want to consider new third-party tools. Maybe there's been some advances that you haven't picked up on, and switching out a third-party tool is something that is a heck of a lot easier to do at this point than waiting 2 or 3 years down the road. And, of course, you have the cost of integration, as well as, I might add, the cost of conversion. But in both of those cases, it is extremely important that you get it in writing. Whatever the cost of the integration are, you must know in advance, as well as any cost of a conversion. And I might add to that, not only the cost of the conversion, but how much of your data gets converted, either in detail form or summary form. And lastly, you may want to apply new integration tools. So there's been many advances in the area of data integration through web tools and so on that you may want to bring into the play and leverage today. Vince?
Well, the very last section of any selection process is the contract negotiation. And once again, some do's and don'ts. The worst don't in the upper left is this old thing called the VOC, a vendor of choice. It's kind of cute. It's like walking into a used car dealer and saying, okay, I've made up my mind. I want to buy that Chevy Camaro. Now let's talk price. I want to negotiate. Well, you just told him he's the winner. You're not going to go to the Ford dealer across the street and look at that Mustang. Why should he give you a discount? You're a klutz. You just blew it. You should walk into that Chevy dealer and say, well, I've been looking at that Mustang. I like it a lot. He's willing to give me 10% off. What do you do on this Camaro? He may go 15% off. Picking a vendor of choice ends negotiations. It's insane. It's just dumb. What you should do on the right, 2 finalists. Pick 2. Make it the Cerner versus Allscripts or Cerner versus Epic, wherever your 2 finalists are. Remember, with a selection process, you just pick the least of evils. There's no perfect solution. It's a question of who's going to give you the best price and terms. On the left, a terrible mistake is let the vendor salesman run rampant in your hospital. Talk to the users and hear that they're the favorite vendor. They'll never give you a discount once they hear they're winning. Far better, all communication goes through the CIO or your consultant or some person, and they tell the vendor all the time what's wrong with them. Boy, in your demo, your radiology stunk. Oh, boy, revenue cycle's terrified of your product. Lower left, leave negotiation to the attorneys. Well, I disagree. Business and technical issues are you. Only you know meaningful use, the details of cost, system response times, remedies and warranties, what money you're going to get back. That's your concern. Lawyers, they're fabulous for HIPAA, your BAA, all the indemnification code, all the Greek and Latin crap. But you got to get into the business issues. And the way we start in the lower right is by issuing a contract questionnaire. Instead of that feature checklist with 1,000 features you want in the system, how about the 100 clauses you want in your contract? You want ICD-11 included for free, as many vendors gave ICD-10 for free. But as some vendors are charging a fortune to their clients for ICD-10. The question of who negotiated their contract. System response times. Everybody's cloud today, remote hosting. And CPOE, if a doctor's taken 4 or 5 seconds to get a response on a click, he or she is going to walk away, go down to the lobby, call a nurse, and telephone the order in. And you're stuck with that loss of productivity. So here's some good do's and don'ts for scratching the surface of contract negotiations. Frank?
Okay. My suggestion for next steps is, 1, carefully review your Siemens contract now. Know where you're locked in, so to speak, and more importantly, where you have some leverage, because that is what you want to be using. Any clauses you can use as leverage in negotiations, what are they? What are you willing to give on or not give on? Outline important elements of a vendor contract. And lastly, my suggestion is don't let the new vendor drive the process. If you want to drive, you must start driving now. Vince?
Good point, Frank. I would say it depends on what product you're on, your contract on. If you're in panic mode, if you're one of these 3 legacy systems that Cerner's only going to support for 3 to 5 years, or you're a short-term Soarian client, you got to start a system selection process yesterday. And if you consider the time, the 6, 9, 12 months to go through all the proper steps, telephone reference checking, interview with the installers, site visits, etc., and then the time to do a thorough contract negotiations, whew, that's why you've got to start now. If you're a Soarian client with 4 or 5, 6 years left, you have a chance to do a tactical plan. You can breathe a little bit, do an internal assessment, prioritize all your replacement products, some of the things Frank and I spoke about in earlier slides. And you lucky folks with up to 10 years left on the Soarian, you have time to do a strategic plan, something we haven't done in many years in IT because of the meaningful use panic. But if you've got this long Soarian contract, you're fortunate to take your time to align where you're going in IT with where your organization is going, and monitor the ongoing service and support you get from Soarian, from Siemens for Soarian, to see if it's really as good as they claimed. And keep in touch with other Soarian CIOs. I think you CIOs can probably share more information among yourselves than you ever learn from consultants like Frank and I, let alone vendors, especially competing vendors. So that's it. That sums it up. Lori, we'll turn the ball over to you if there's some Q&A you wanted to go through.
Okay, thanks, Vince. The first question is kind of funny. Are you telling us we should not sign with Cerner?
No, I don't think we're saying that. You know, primarily what we're saying is you have to make a decision, and this is the process you ought to go through. Cerner's got some good product. Cerner's got some weaknesses, just like any vendor. You need to know what you're getting into. Vince,
yeah, and I would exactly echo what Frank said. You've got to go through a selection process. Your negotiating power with Cerner to get a decent price and a decent contract is pretty minimal if you're just going to buy from them and not talk to another vendor. You're into the Chevy dealer again saying, I love that Camaro. Give me a deal. He won't give you a deal. If you tell him you're looking at a Mustang too, he'll start to get nervous. So don't sign with Cerner right away. Go to market. Do a selection. Let competition work for you.
Okay. Carol wants to know, what do you think the impact is on a provider's IT staff to move to Cerner from an older Siemens HIS?
Well, I'll jump in on that. I've seen a lot of them, and I can tell you it depends on which of the Siemens products. If you're the large Invision, very complex dual set of financials and clinicals, two practically separate systems, Cerner may be kind of equal to Invision and staffing. Soarian's probably the same. If you're down on Medseries, I say down only in terms of size. Medseries, as it was a mini computer-based system, today it runs on servers. Started as IBM System 38 and AS400, and now it's just iSeries servers. You've got a smaller financial staff, and the complexity of Cerner's Millennium may be a challenge, as with the complexity of Epic and of Allscripts. You'd be probably much better off looking at Meditech or Paragon, whose staffing levels are much more your size. So your size should tell you very much what alternative vendors you look at. IT staffing is hard to get new FTEs approved these days. You're probably limited to what you got.
Okay. Gregory wants to know how many customers are on Invision only, so not on Soarian at all.
Wow, well, I'll jump in and make a guess, Frank. I don't know if you have any statistics, but I would say on Invision, the clinicals were capable of attaining testing for meaningful use. Frank, you would know. I'm pretty sure Invision was certified for stage 2 by Siemens.
Yes, definitely.
So there's something like 350, 375 hospitals on Invision. That probably means about 150, 170 contracts, as many multi-IDNs. And of that group, a large number are both clinicals and financials, maybe half. And then the other half probably have more of Invision financials and somebody else's clinicals, like Cerner. I bet there's a large number of clients with Cerner clinicals and Invision financials.
Okay. This is a two-part question. Do you think Cerner will keep Soarian financials, or in general, do you think they'll keep any of the Soarian products?
That's a really good question. You know, the experience and the word on the street is Cerner's had many problems with Profit. on more than one occasion. Of course, Soarian financials weren't exactly born perfect either. There was a heck of a lot of effort and issues that what they went through and what amounted to at least a 10-year development process. Revenue cycle systems are bears, having designed and developed 2 of them in my lifetime. It's amazing what it takes to really put together a revenue cycle system for any vendor. I think my wild guess is you're going to see a transition of Profit over to probably Soarian financials on a cloud basis, is my guess. Vince?
Well, Cerner has their Profit has been renamed. They call it Cerner Revenue Cycle. Let's say CRC to make an acronym out of it. And they run that at 175 hospitals around the country. I think it's weak, far weaker than their Millennium Clinicals. I think their EHR is far superior to their billing ability. And it's a shame. I wish they would consider Soarian financials. I think it would be a vast improvement. But architecturally, it's a whole different system. There'll be no integration. There'll be an interface. They've got all their hundreds of employees who work on CRC. What are they going to do? Move them to Malvern? It's strange. So I fear Soarian financials are going to be sunset like everything else Siemens is going to be sunset. And it's a shame. I think if Cerner would only take a good look at it, they may see it's better than their Profit or CRC, but that's not the way this ball goes. It's going to be sunset all the Siemens products in time, sadly.
I think the important thing there is that is a very, very difficult decision. I mean, if I was sitting in any of those executive chairs, that's going to be one of the tougher ones they make.
As Matt mentioned that you didn't comment on the Siemens Pharmacy MAK application. Do you have any thoughts there?
Well, I'll jump in quickly. Whatever Cerner's counterpart is going to be the primary application. And that applies to lab, radiology, ED, nurse staffing, you name it, any niche system in a hospital. If Cerner has an equivalent, and their product line is incredibly diverse. Cerner probably offers one of everything in the clinical arena. If they have something Millennium, that's going to be continued. It'll be a very unlikely situation that Cerner keeps any Siemens product unless they happen to have a gap. So since Cerner does have a pharmacy product, I don't see MAK being kept. But again, as Frank said, it's going to be a tough decision that the 2 executives argue about over the next year. What do you think, Frank? Because you guys got bought when you were with Citation.
Yeah, if they're out aggressively marketing Millennium, obviously, to replace Soarian or as a new add-on, operationally, I just can't see them supporting the Siemens pharmacy package terribly long. It's just one more different product to deal with the regulations, as I said earlier. So if I had to place a bet today, I'd say probably not.
All right. Mark would like to know if Epic announcing that they'll begin hosting in 2015 changes your vendors for the mid-size hospitals.
Well, I'll jump into that real quickly. Some of you folks may know Epic partnered with Philips about 5-6 years ago to sell Epicare to the mid-range hospitals. They called it Extenesis or some weird name like that. And it was a dismal failure. I'm not sure why. Price too high, too difficult to install. I don't know the reasons, but it failed. And Epic has always been, I give a lot of credit to Judy Faulkner, very kind to her mentor, Neil Pappalardo, since he was big in the small hospital market, Meditech's forte, small to mid-size. Judy started in the large size. I think she'll slowly come down to the mid-range, where Meditech is maybe stretched a little bit to run. 3, 4, 500 beds is pushing the limits of Meditech. I can see Cerner Epic coming down to that range, but boy, never way down to 300 and below, not for a long time until they sell everybody else, until they're a total monopoly in the large and mid-range hospital. So I don't think the fact that Epic is going remote is anything particular. It's simply a good business decision on their part, increase their revenue. Why give all that money to Dell when they make a sale? That's one of the silly things. Both Epic and Meditech did not book hardware revenue. Their revenue would jump up 20% if they sold hardware like every other vendor does. So I think it's simply Epic being wise and wanting to get a piece of that revenue as well now.
I think the challenge for Epic moving in that direction, basically deploying it on a cloud, selling it to smaller institutions, is going to be getting the Epic product technology to really run in the cloud, as opposed to what today is pretty much a Citrix farm situation. The bigger those farms get, the more complex and likely you're going to have problems. So what you really want is product that was built and written for the cloud, and I think that's going to be their real challenge.
Dennis works for a Cerner hospital that's about to purchase another hospital with Soarian, and he'd like to know your thoughts on lack of negotiating position under the Cerner purchase of Siemens for hospitals in this position.
Yeah, it gets back to that earlier question about somebody saying, so I shouldn't buy from Cerner right now. Darn right you shouldn't. You should go to market. You should get bids from Epic, Allscripts, maybe GE, and depending on their size, maybe Meditech and Paragon. And honestly, look at alternatives rather than just be seduced by the new kid in town. Again, your negotiating is directly related to the competitive factor. If Cerner knows they're your only alternative, they're not going to give you a deal. At least if I were them, I wouldn't give you a deal. I would hit you for all I could. Whereas if you had, let's say, people coming in from Allscripts to do demos, and they said that this Eclipsys CHR rocked, and they loved it, and that word got back to Cerner, your chances of getting a discount go way up, and your chances of getting far better contract terms go way up. So competition, that's the way to get a deal from any vendor. Frank, your thoughts?
Oh, I fully agree.
It's when a vendor thinks they're going to lose, that's when you get the best deal. When you know they're going to win, that's when you get the worst deal.
Okay, Wes was told in writing by Siemens that the last allowable end term date for INV financials is 9/30/2024. Do you buy it?
Well, that's 10 years out. Sure, I just fear that's in writing from Siemens. He's not going to get something to writing from Cerner. And I would defer to his attorneys whether Cerner is really buying all those letters that Siemens may have written. Does Cerner have to live up to Siemens' commitments and obligations? I sure don't know. That's a case where you do turn it over to the attorneys.
Well, I think the important point, Vince, is what you're making is get it in writing from Cerner. Then you can believe it.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad, but Siemens is not going to be in a position of authority starting February 2015. And in 2024, that letter may be a nice artifact to put in a museum somewhere. That's about all. I wonder how many assholes of letters from HBO and letters from Technicon committing to things that vaporized 20, 30 years ago.
Jens would like to know about the Siemens radiology system. Is Cerner picking that up as well?
I'll jump in again with my... Go ahead, Frank.
I was just going to simply say I think it's the same question we were asked earlier about pharmacy. You know, generally speaking, the stronger product is the Cerner product. Maybe not. It's not a day and night difference, but it's a somewhat stronger product. And again, as I said earlier, if you're going to Millennium or something along the lines of Millennium, there's going to be more and more reasons to not keep the Siemens radiology product. So I just don't see it as a long-term or mid-term survivability.
Yeah, I'd just jump in real quickly and say if it's a RIS, a radiology information system, scheduling, that kind of stuff, Cerner has a fairly strong one, and I think they're going to keep their Millennium RIS and sunset the Siemens version. If it's PACS, that's a whole different question. Siemens used to be strong in PACS, not as much lately, much more on World of Agfa and other competitors like that. And I don't believe Cerner has their own indigenous PACS system. So the standalone Siemens PACS system should live for a long time, I would think. But the RIS, the Radiology Information System, I think will be pushed to Millennium very quickly.
So the question there really is if I stick with the Siemens PACS and put in the Cerner RIS, you got to make sure that you got that integration worked out and in writing and so on.
Right, just like you were buying a PACS from Fuji, Agfa,
right.
Philips, anybody else. Classic interface challenges.
Do you have an estimate of the percentage of clients that will migrate to Cerner versus moving to another vendor?
Well, I just called my stockbroker this morning to see how much of my pension fund was invested in Cerner. So my question is going to be totally unbiased.
Well, I can answer that question from real experience and having lived through all ends of mergers and acquisitions over the years along these lines. And you're not going to believe this number, and I know some people are going to go bonkers, but if the acquiring vendor gets to keep 50%, maybe 60% of the existing client base, he's done well. Okay? Now, keep in mind, in Cerner's situation, as I pointed out earlier, the return on investments of that $1.2 billion. You got recurring revenue in Siemens of about something just under $1 billion. If I cut 30% of the overhead, which I know they can do, I am making $300 million a year net profit, which in 3 or 4 years pays off for the Cerner acquisition. So if Cerner only converts 1 or 2 or a handful of clients, particularly large clients, they've more than made their money back. Now, they're going to do better than that, I'm sure. But again, the history that I've seen is 60%, you are doing fantastic.
I tend to agree. I would say I give Cerner a lot of high marks for their sales and marketing organization. Ironically, the CEO of Allscripts, Paul Black, headed it up. Superb VP of sales and marketing for many years, became the COO at Cerner, I believe. And to his credit, he's left a fabulous team that's going to sell, I'd agree with Frank, 50 to 60% easily. It's almost as good as the Siemens team, who I thought was the best in the business, although when you see their Soarian sales record, pretty flat. That's unfortunate, but boy, for 20, 30, 35 years, SMS's sales and marketing team rocked. And I think those two organizations together will sell 50, 60% easily.
Okay. What are your thoughts on the Cerner add-on Siemens clinical customers should be expecting in the near term?
Cerner add-ons?
Yeah.
Add-on, if you mean fees, I'm not really sure what the meaning of that is. If they're going to mean brand new products or extra fees added to the bill?
I'm not sure. Well, I'll move on and maybe Besher can elaborate. Scott would like to know, Vince, why you shaved.
When your beard turns gray, you start to shave it every day. When my beard was brown, I was proud of it. And I'm starting to my chest next, but we'll get to that later.
Oh, no.
No. Vince, tell him the truth. When I went bald, you felt sorry for me, so you shaved that beard.
Vince, I need to clarify from Larry that NTT Data does have an ERP solution.
Oh, great. My apologies then. I'm sorry I had it wrong on my spreadsheet. And,
nope, just
the only question then is Quadra. Yeah, thank you. The only question then is QuadraMeds. I thought they sunset it years ago, but I could be wrong. So if anyone's listening from QuadraMed, please feel free to correct us. And again, that spreadsheet I did, as I said, was a very high level. I didn't do a in-depth research and issue RFPs and all that crap. I just wanted to show how, depending on what your needs are, you consider different vendor solutions.
Okay.
So thanks to Larry.
Yeah, it's called Optimum General Accounting, just so everyone knows.
Good.
Let's see. Next one. We're getting down to the end here. What do you think the future is of the Siemens HIE?
Well, I'll give my quick thoughts. Health Information Exchange is here to stay. Everybody has to do one, and every state seems to have built, 2 or 3 different organizations in large states, one in the small states. And there will be many, many alternatives out there to run an HIE. I don't think of Siemens as a real strong contender around the country in the HIE world. And it's simply an opportunity for any vendor to jump in. Most of them seem to be local. Most states seem to run their own HIEs pretty independently.
You know, the other thing, Vince, that we didn't say, which I'm going to say now, is in a lot of these cases where Siemens has some good product and maybe it's just not the right fit for Cerner, I wouldn't be surprised if Cerner turns around and sells it off to another third party.
Interesting. Sure.
Recover some of that $1.2 billion.
Yeah, I could see. I mean, if Neil Pepperado was in this kind of business, you could really see Meditech, for example, making an offer for the Medseries client and working them over. But it's just not Meditech's modus operandi. They don't do it that way. Maybe the old HBOC would have done it. They did a dozen acquisitions that way. The new McKesson.
Well, I'm thinking more along the lines of these are best-of-breed products that just don't fit the Cerner platform, so to speak. So, you know, sell it off. You know, maybe there's a couple of dozen hospitals running it or whatever, and you just pick up some change and move on.
Yeah, a good example, that could be the HDX product of Siemens.
Right.
Pretty independent of an HIS, and that could be a marketable commodity.
Back to the question I asked earlier about add-ons. To be specific, I think she was Bessler was referring to Mobile MD, the HIE.
And the question
well, I go back to our mantra of if Cerner has an equivalent product, their equivalent Millennium product is going to replace it. If they do not, they may be interested in acquiring it and interfacing it to Millennium, or as Frank said, spinning it off. Frank, do you know much about their HIE product?
The HIE, no, not specifically.
Yeah, I go with a general principle. If Cerner has an equivalent, that's going to rule. If they don't, they'll have the choice of building an interface to it, since they've bought it now, or as Frank suggested, maybe put it on the market, selling it to a third party.
I think the core basically is, when you get really knock it down to brass tacks, is no vendor can support innumerable number of different systems, typically running on different platforms and technologies and so on and so forth. So if the product you're running is a unique, I'll say it positively, product in all those regards, odds are it won't survive.
All right. This is going to be our last question. What is the current RCM product that's closest to the Eagle 2000 product, especially for New York?
Boy, that's a good question. I used to work for HIS in Brooklyn in the 1980s when they first wrote that product, and it's so highly customized to New York City Medicaid and New York City Blue Cross. It's a challenge. Couple come to mind. Keen, the new NTT data, had a wonderful system, a very strong revenue cycle system. But I don't think they sell. I think they mainly sell Optimum these days. Quadramed used to be strong in that area, and I don't know how N. Harris is pumping R&D into it. It boils down to the one I showed on my chart, probably Allscripts, the old SDK system, Sam D. Kaufman out of Boston, which they've renamed, I think, Sunrise Revenue Cycle. It's probably the strongest alternative. They have a number of clients in the New York area. I don't know GE and the IDX, the old AHN modules. They had many New York clients. I would start with an RFI to many vendors and ask them how many clients they have in the New York City area. And based on their answers to that RFI, you'd know who your potential alternatives are. I guess the strongest is Allscripts. And from there on, that'd be an interesting question.
All right. Well, that finishes up our Q&A portion and concludes the webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Frank and Vince, for a fun and interesting presentation today. Attendees, please watch your email for links to the recording of the webinar, as well as to a link to the PDF version of the PowerPoint presentation. And we look forward to seeing you at our next HIS Talk webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day.